All right, good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to Collaboratory. Welcome to the workshop of Resilient Lee and the Recovery Task Force. My name's Terry Mazzani. I'm on staff here at Collaboratory and have had the delightful, very productive partnership with Haggerty Consulting, and we'll have introductions coming up for that too. This is the last of 14 workshops that we have scheduled as part of the recovery and resilience planning process. And we'll go through that in a minute. Just want to frame up front that this is a public meeting. Yes, it's not a town hall meeting. This is not a meeting to be gathering input. This is a meeting specifically organized to provide subject matter experts with the opportunity to address branch members who are the working groups of the recovery and resilience plan and to answer questions for that. So this is an information gathering opportunity along the overall planning process. Just wanted to set expectations for why we're here and what this is all about. One of the things that we know to be true about our region's response to the hurricane and the recovery and rebuilding efforts is that it is a team sport. It takes all of us working together and learning what we can from the impact of the hurricane and how we can make our region more resilient. What are the innovations that we need? Those are the two standards that Commissioner Ruane has set forth in our processes: innovation and resilience. So that's what we're here for. To be able to pick this up on the live stream that is going on here, as well as to hear each other, we do need to use the microphones. The process is pretty simple. There's a little black button which then turns it green, and then for you to speak. We've got enough around the tables for people to start. So if we can start with introductions of our panelists here for the energy workshop.
Rob Price, Deputy Director of the County DOT. Clark Hawkins, Director of Electric Operations at Lee County Electric Law.
Al Ruth, Manager of Operation Business School.
Charlotte.
Great. And our Haggerty teammates here. Start with Lee.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lee Mayfield. I work for Haggerty Consulting, here to help Terry facilitate with the group. I'm our Director of Response on a day-to-day basis, so happy to be here to help the project. This part of the state means a lot. I used to be the Emergency Management Director here in Lee County for a while, worked in Collier County as well, so spent about 10 years in Southwest Florida. And again, happy to be here to support. I think there's a lot of opportunity here with this topic, and looking forward to diving in. So thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. Robbie here with the Resilient Lee support team.
Jason Rogers with the Resilient Lee support team.
Great. I'm going to go a few slides deep, and then I'll ask the branch members to introduce themselves once the context is clear. So these are your two facilitators here, myself and Lee. And as context, in December, the Board of County Commissioners had authorized the establishment of the Recovery Task Force and Resilient Lee. These are the members here. It is chaired by Board of County Commissioner Kevin Ruane. For that, and it consists of the mayors and elected officials throughout the agencies and jurisdictions in our county and region. And then it's organized into these 8 working groups, which are called branches. This is modeled after the national framework from FEMA. for disaster recovery. And so that's the basis of this, the goals of resilience and innovation that I talked about. It's a very aggressive timeline that we have from the very first meeting of the Recovery Task Force in February, monthly meetings of that group culminating in a presentation of the Recovery and Resilience Plan to the Board of County Commissioners on December 5th of this year. We've gone through a lot of community engagement, town halls, identifying what the needs are. We're now pivoting into the planning phase of this work. And so this culminates the last of gathering subject matter expert information into our planning process. There will be one more round of community engagement towards the end of August, September, where then we will share the preliminary plans and ideas out to the community to gather additional input before the plan is finalized and presented to the Board of County Commissioners. Outreach has been extensive. We had the 15 in person and then 2 virtual town hall meetings around the entire county. A lot of media attention to this, more than 1,000 participants, and to date, more than 5,000 individuals have completed the surveys that's still available. We also coupled this with our region-wide conversation called On the Table that had more than 1,000 surveys completed. The theme of this workshop, here we are looking at energy, but there are 4 main types of workshops here organized around key themes of critical infrastructure, community resilience, business and workforce, and the attainable and resilient housing for that. So that we had to reschedule this into this week because of schedule conflicts with individuals, but we're very pleased that we have this, and this is still in time for this Friday. The Recovery Task Force has its next meeting, so we'll be able to incorporate the input that we gained from today. For that, would encourage people to access this QR code to submit initiative ideas. What are the projects, the priorities, the work that we could be doing? We'll be very attentive as we go through this conversation for the ways that we can be more innovative and more resilient for the community. Our topic here is identifying power infrastructure projects that would provide the greatest resilient value in defending these key infrastructure assets. The weaknesses here that must be addressed, long-term investments. Before I go forward, now let me ask the branch members. This is open to all 8 branches, so we've got an array of individuals here. But if you would care to introduce yourselves.
Steve Sarkozy, Village of Estero. Bill Rubble, former mayor of Estero.
Ryan Carter, Scott Lindbergh, Trucking Logistics Company.
Great, thank you. So we're well represented across the branches, and all of this information is recorded and captured and then presented in aggregate form for the. So with that, let me turn it over to Lee to start with the questions and to facilitate the conversations here with our subject matter experts and our branch members.
Yeah, thank you, Terry, and thanks again for being here, everyone. I think 2 quick things, as Terry mentioned, the purpose here, what an opportunity, right? I don't have to tell anyone here how significant Hurricane Ian was. Southwest Florida has had hurricanes in the past, tropical storms, but nothing to the level of Ian here. So I think just as Ian was significant, as is this opportunity here. So I think the resources that come with any of these big events allow us to think big and to maybe not just continue with our pre-Ian planning. So I think that's something that of course everyone's thinking front of mind, that we can really think big here and throw some good ideas out. You know, if you look at the resiliency models across the country, you know, look at a rubber band. If you stretch the rubber band and let go, it comes back to how it was before. And I think that's the goal for a lot of these different sectors that we're talking about. The second point, before we dive into really an open-ended question for the subject matter experts here, is I don't want to minimize the importance of this topic. This sector, infrastructure, power, water, utilities is huge. And just looking back on my time in emergency management, we spent lots of time with our first responders who do a great job in our community. We can spend an equal amount of time with our utility providers and stakeholders. I think that's an area where we have a lot of room to continue that collaboration. We have examples, whether you look at, if you remember, the state of Texas, Austin, Texas area had a winter storm a couple years back, Winter Storm Uri. The Colonial Pipeline incident really talked to a lot of these lessons learned on the utility provider side. So I think that's the success in all of this, is we have the ability to think big and to come up with solutions that maybe weren't on the table before Hurricane Ian. So I think, you know, with that, you know, would love to hear from the utility providers, our subject matter experts here. And I think an open-ended question just to get this dialogue going. You know, we all, one thing we mentioned at the last workshop was there's a lot of great things about this community here in Lee County. We do a great job in a number of different areas. And of course, this is not a totally new issue. So if you look at pre-Hurricane Ian and all of the things we've done since then, I think the question would be, you know, what priorities are rising to the top now? And maybe this is a collective list of priorities or individual to your agency or your organization. But I'd love to hear just from some of the SMEs here to start the conversation, maybe to highlight some of your top 1, 2, 3 priorities post-Hurricane Ian. Again, some of those may be ongoing before the hurricane, but maybe things have changed since then. So I'll kind of generally pause there and pose that question to the group and see if we have any takers. And I think the conversation will go from there. So any priorities that rise to mind from your agencies?
I can start if you'd like.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. So one of our priorities that worked very well for us during Ian, and we will continue to magnify, is our hardening projects. These came into play after the 2004-2005 season of Charlie and, you know, several other hurricanes that blew through during that time. And we had a lot of rebuilds because our infrastructure was not able to withstand the wind. So that has been a huge initiative for us that continues to this day. To date, we have 72% of our grid hardened. And what that means is with overhead facilities, we strengthen the wood poles, we change some out to concrete. Sometimes the spans are much shorter. And then those are for our distribution poles. For our transmission poles, which are the very large ones, they are either steel or concrete as well. And then we have continued to underground our facilities. We had a pilot that was called Storm Secure Underground Program with the Public Service Commission, who regulates utilities within the state of Florida. And it has been very successful, and they have granted us a permanent opportunity to continue to put undergrounding in, and we will continue to do that. As you know, the challenge, each one of those has challenges. With an underground program, it doesn't deal with wind, doesn't deal with vegetation. It does deal with storm surge and flooding. We can't get in to fix until after that goes away. So there can be a delay, but you don't have the wind damage that you might, or vegetation damage with the overhead lines. I have a lot more I can say about that, but I think that's probably good to start and give some others an opportunity.
Sure. Yeah. Common themes there that I think we'll talk about throughout the afternoon as well. So anybody else?
Yes, sir. Also similar to us, I mean, some of the hardening programs we did, we also started our transmission hardening back in 2012. And during Hurricane Ian, we did not have one transmission structure failure. So, you know, those efforts that we put into that have paid off quite well. Now on the distribution, we've also changed the what they call a class of the pole, which is the girth of it. We upped that a few years ago so that we're installing larger poles away from what we historically had done in the past. Now, what we did see during Hurricane Ian is that the actual failure rate of concrete and wood poles was practically the same. So, you know, if you look at the overall, just sort of put it into perspective, you know, we have about 170,000 poles, and we had about 3,000 failures. And then if you break it down further and you split that up between wood and concrete, concrete failed at about 1.5% and wood failed at about 1.8. So very, very close in, you know, the actual failure rates that we saw. And if you were to look at the footprint that we have or the population of those poles and factor that in, I would say they probably failed at almost the exact same rate, which is something that we probably otherwise wouldn't have thought was possible. Now, a lot of people would ask, what's the difference between a distribution pole and a concrete pole on transmission? It's the girth. I mean, the footprint on a transmission pole is enormous, and, you know, it's just not practical to install those types of poles in a distribution easement. So it's the difference. The other thing that we see as definitely something we need to look at, work on. We've got some FEMA grants proposed on that, is the elevation of the substations and substation equipment. You know, this is the first storm where we had a storm surge, you know, in any of our memories. And in addition to that, the substations that we have on the barrier islands and along the coastal plains, they took damage. I mean, it was Sanibel. We had probably 9 feet of water come across that substation, and Pine Island was about 2.5, 3 foot of water. So it damaged a lot of equipment. It had to all be replaced before you do it. So one of the things we want to do is raise that equipment up as well.
Any other priorities or even questions from the branch members as well? Feel free to jump in if you have any questions on your mind. Anything else from the group, or we can move forward? Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, obviously we work closely with the power companies. Our hardening efforts that we're spearheading right now are looking at our traffic signals network. We've done extensive damage assessments at all the intersections. And what we're finding is where we have diagonal or box spans instead of mast arms, we sustain significant increases in damage. So we are working towards looking at a kind of a geographical dividing line west of I-75 in those locations, identifying our oldest structures, going through and looking for replacement monies to help us go back and put new mast arm facilities at those intersections. We're also considering some elevating of our signal cabinets in some locations. We had 42 signal cabinets go underwater. Electronics don't work very well when they go underwater, especially salt water. So can we attach those to poles, you know, elevate them somehow? So that's one of the things that we're looking at as well.
Go ahead, Jeff.
With us, we have over 300 wastewater lift stations, and all of them were without power, except for our masters where we have stationary generators. So it was quite the challenge to get around to every one of them, especially after we got water restored, which came about, 4 or 5 days after the storm hit. So we got a grant to do some of the generators, but it's about $10 million, but that's not going to get us a whole lot of lift stations when you've got that many. So, to put a stationary generator there at each one of those stations. So, you know, I don't know what the solution is, but, and then once you put the generator, then, you know, you've got all the maintenance and all of that to go with it. So we're also looking at possibly not just generators, but bypass pumps, because there's less maintenance on those rather than going with generators, because they're all pretty much self-contained and have an engine on them that operates the pump. Our south RO plant was severely damaged. The building, it was built in 1977, so it's going to be coming up on 50 years in about 4 years. So it's going to be reaching the end of its useful life. That's something that we would like to build a new hardened structure for that RO plant, because it's our largest RO plant. It's 18 million gallons a day. So that's critical to get a new building and facility started, you know, on that. So that's pretty much our really critical items. But we were pretty lucky. And I got a really good crew, so we were able to recover quickly. But those are just some things to think about for the future that I'd like to see get funded.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, I made the parallel to our first responders in public safety we work with on a weekly basis. You know, I used to say, you know, if we get power and water turned back on after a storm or any disaster, the community just solved about 95% of their problems. So that's why I think, in my mind, you all are first responders and should be a part of that system. And that collaboration, I think, is something that we continue to improve on across the country. Maybe another question, you know, outside of the initial response there, what would be most helpful to you all in your leadership from the community, not just speaking from a city or county perspective, but in general? You know, I know funding would probably be the first thing that comes to mind, which is something we can talk through. Involving you all in the process pre-storm, instead of, you know, maybe having, you know, series of meetings before, but really digging in and working with you, if that's something that would be helpful. I think that would be a good question maybe to hear from you all on what would be most helpful to you all in the hurricane off season from the various stakeholders in the community that would allow you to recover faster. You know, that's the goal of a group like the Emergency Operations Center, is to allow you all to do your job and get the community back to normal as quickly as possible, because that's, you know, that's what you do. So just maybe a question for the group: what would be most helpful to you all as we spend, you know, year round planning and investing in this issue?
And one of the things that we're looking to do is upgrade or add some additional service centers in our service territory. One specifically we're going to do is over in West Cape. It'll be right on our property over at the RO plant, across from the RO plant. We're also going to relocate the pretty well dated service center that's out in Lehigh. We're also going to put what we're calling a mini service center out on Upper Captiva. It won't be a manned substation, if you will. It'll be provisioned with some materials. It'll also be a place where crews can congregate, work out their day plans. It'll also be a place where we can store some of our materials and supplies and equipment to help the restoration effort. And we're also working to rebuild the service center out on Sanibel. It's once again a pretty aged facility. So specifically, one of the things that the community could help us on, particularly government agencies, is help us through the permitting process. And that goes anywhere from acquisition of land and maybe some restrictions that have been priorly placed on some of those properties. And work with us to try to accommodate what we're trying to do, yet still accomplish what the intent of whatever that restriction was put on parcels. I was reading another, I mean, down here, properties at a premium. And for us to get locations where we want to strategically place service centers is important. Usually it's on an artery, if you will. So we've got ready access to get out on the road with our resources. Another thing that it's not related to service centers, but to projects that we've got in the queue are, and they're somewhat in our plan and somewhat in FEMA requests, are some transmission ties that we want to have between some of our radially fed substations. Radial fed substations only fed from one location. What we want to do is loop our transmission system, so we have two feeds going into the substation. So if you happen to lose this transmission feed for whatever reason, whether it's the line or upstream devices, you have a second feed coming into that substation. Much of our service territory is looped like that. Cape Coral is a great example where every one of our substations are fed at least from two different locations. Where we could use some help, once again, is in easements. We need easement acquisitions. We need easements built into folks' plans. If roads are getting expanded, talk to us. And we have a real good relationship with DOT about making sure that we have a place to locate our facilities. The PUEs over in Cape Coral was a fabulous plan that was in place. That worked for Cape Coral. There's other areas of our service territory with those PUEs, public utility easements, don't exist. So we're out dealing with individual property owners, sometimes commercial, sometimes governmental. And then if we can't get easements, but we gotta have a line, we're ended up putting in a road right of way. And when we do that, it exposes us to relocation down the road because we really don't have an interest in the property at that point. So that's just a couple of examples.
It's good. Anybody else on that topic? Things that would make life easier as you work to build resiliency in your organizations? The challenge, one of your challenges, I assume, is, you're also planning not just for hurricanes, right? That's not your day to day. Fortunately, we spend only a small percentage of our time dealing with hurricanes. So you're also expanding and building infrastructure to keep up with our growing community as well. So kind of working in tandem on those. Since we're talking about investments, I think from a mitigation standpoint, their eligibility requirements for certain grants. I'm just curious, are you all involved in that process, the funding process after storms? And we can take this in any direction we want, I think, in line with what would be most useful to you when it comes to funding with these various grants and resources. I think that's an area where, in my opinion, these investments are worth it after storms, because you all provide that service, and a lot of other agencies do not. The private sector owns a lot of the critical infrastructure across the country. And just curious if, what your year-round involvement in that process is with the various stakeholders in the community.
As far as FPL goes, any type of funding requests need to be approved by the Public Service Commission. So we really don't work on a local basis with that. We also have the capability to, everybody on their bill see a storm recovery charge. And again, that's Public Service Commission approved to fund various aspects of the recovery and what we need to do going forward. So we don't have any local requests.
With Lee County Co-op, as a not-for-profit cooperative, we get our funding three ways, either through rates, through loans, or through grants. We participate, if you will, through the FEMA hazard mitigation grant process. We participate also during the restoration, the funds that are made available for restoration from FEMA. And we are actively involved with the FEMA requests coming out of Ian. We probably have upwards of 150 to 200 million in proposed projects.
Sure. And I know the local governments get, their funding through their normal channels there. Rob, anything you were gonna add?
Well, I would just say, yeah, obviously, yes, we're definitely involved in that process after a storm event. What my experience has been is, from a DOT perspective, our facilities don't rate very high as you go through the ranking procedures. I know our mast arm hardening project didn't even make the first cut of our HMGP after this storm. So I don't know if that's, if it would be that way after every event, but when you have an event where obviously the utility system took a massive hit, so there's a lot of emphasis on utility projects. And I think, the complaints have definitely not gone away with the detection system not being solid, so it's like I'm not sure that the ranking system actually serves a good purpose for DOT from our project's perspectives.
See some of the board members, branch members here taking some good notes. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions about your Ian experience or broad questions. Go ahead, Troy.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Troy Churchill again, representing the Health and Social Services. Just a quick question regarding specifically more power. Is there am I too close to someone?
Yeah, if you're not talking, mute your phone, mute your mic, please.
There we go. Is that okay? Okay. Is there a priority list that you have for facilities, specifically healthcare facilities, group homes, physician offices, primary care offices, that type of thing, obviously hospitals, that you guys go through as, as part of your maybe pre-storm checklist, but also post-storm and getting them back on their feet?
Yes, it's an involved process with several different components. We identify what we call critical infrastructure facilities. Top of the list would be examples of 911 centers, major hospital facilities. And then within FPL's system, we will code all the nursing homes, different types of facilities, et cetera. But we can't dilute the system for everything to be important, because then it just doesn't work with the restoration process. So we have a very important process with each county's emergency management group. We meet with them February, March timeframe each year, and they identify a list of critical infrastructure facilities that they deem are most important for their county. And depending on the population of the county, there's a certain number of feeders, which are the main lines, that are designated as critical infrastructure feeders. So they determine what those facilities are, and they really do vary from county to county as to what that importance is. For example, with Lee County, you definitely got hospital, 911, which I've already mentioned, governmental facilities, some medical care facilities. It's just a fire, rescue, et cetera. There's a broad spectrum, which they have deemed is most important. And we go over this list each year. And Lee will remember he was involved in a big redo of that a few years ago. I will say in Collier County, they have a lot of healthcare and nursing care facilities on their list because that's what they deem is critical for that area. So it's really up to the county. If you have questions or concerns on the process, I would suggest you talk to Sandra, say your last name correctly, in emergency management. But that is our process. And then, like I said, they're identified, and we go through that process once the restoration begins.
And that's on the FPL side, right?
That's on the FPL side.
So LCEC is the same.
Yeah, very similar. We do have a process we go through on an annual basis. We update the list and we identify those critical loads. And with hospitals, shelters, fire
Shelters,
stations,
yeah.
things of that nature would be high on the list. And then what we also do is we have what we call restoration coordinators, and they have the designated maps for the areas that they're responsible for. So we identify those critical loads and which circuits they're on. So if everything is equal, that would be a priority for that restoration coordinator on the sub circuits that they're working on. Now, with that being said, similar to FPNL, it is not only, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. It's also how much damage do you have? So if you have a feeder that is completely destroyed and, it's going to take you a week and a half to completely rebuild that infrastructure, and you can get all the other circuits back on, you're going to have to shift some of those priorities. So some of that is done, but those judgments those are judgment calls that come into the war room, and those are things that are discussed, and we either put additional resources on it or do what we have to do to be able to serve.
Just last follow-up. Can we get a copy of that list? Or is it publicly available of critical facilities?
I'm not sure that it's probably a county question.
Because there are infrastructure facilities on there that are not governmental, so they're private, they can potentially be accounts that we're not able to share. We're not able to share customer account information. But the list is
Yeah, and I think some of the challenges there, you said all else being equal, like if everything was equal, if damage was equal, if we had equal resources, I think the challenge there is the damage isn't always equal. So you may have prioritized assets in one part of the county that's unimpacted, and then resources aren't equal. Bringing resources in, I look back to Hurricane Irma, where I think 50 plus counties were declared federally for Irma. So you had utility resources, debris resources being pushed all throughout the state. Which makes it a little more complicated for the more heavily impacted areas possibly. So there's some context there, I think, to that conversation. But I know when I was at the county, we certainly appreciated the collaboration and the partnership there on what we called Blue Sky Days. Jeff.
And that being said, we are staffed 24/7 in the EOC. And when there are specific instances that come up during that storm or during the restoration that are unique or critical, we're constantly addressing and can shift if there is a true crisis somewhere. But the process prior to storm is what we've just described, and that's what we like to adhere to.
Yeah, and that's almost identical to what I was going to say too, that we have the representatives in the EOC. They can call into the to the war room, if you will, and we can try to reprioritize to take care of any of those critical infrastructure items or facilities that pop up. Also, again, enhancement that we're making to kind of our process is with the technology we've got with our GIS system. We've created layers of the critical infrastructures, so facilities, so that it's very visible to the folks in the war room where we need to get resources to, what hasn't been restored, what needs to be restored in order to get power to those facilities. So that will do nothing but has to enhance the ability of getting facilities up and running.
Lee, let me jump in on
Sure,
this
good, real quick,
too.
and then we'll go to Fred.
So Troy, your questioning is along the same lines of some of the questioning that DOT has when we're sitting in the EOC with LCEC and FPNL. And one thing I'll tell you is the coordination efforts after Ian were 100 times better than after Irma. Okay. Our frustration becomes where we know we have widespread power outages and we're trying to put generators out at traffic signals to try to get the signal system back up and running. And there's not a lot of information that's coming our way from the power companies that says, this is where our folks are focused. So if we know that LCEC and FPNL are focused on, US 41 around Lee Health, around the Lee Memorial Hospital and around Gulf Coast, we may position our resources somewhere else because we're anticipating power is going to get restored in those areas first. So the planning side of it is great, but once the storm happens and we kind of start making an assessment of the damages, any types of information that we can get from a DOT perspective on what the charge is for the power companies is helpful for us in setting our resources out to try to help get the power system and the signal system back up and running. So, and I will say that we found it extremely helpful when things are really starting to come back and we get these one-offs, these signals that are in areas where you have power restored in most places, that, you know, we just go over across the table and say, hey, we got this location. Can you let us know what's going on? And LCEC and FPL would be responsive and out there getting it up. But if we knew better about what the plan of attack was from LCEC and FPNL, it would really help us position our resources better as well. We can be reactive and more reactive based on their plan, and not so much dictating, hey, can you go here? You tell us where you're going and we'll go somewhere else kind of situation.
Sure.
And we, LCC got that type of feedback and we were reacting to that. We're getting, we got some screens up and some of them are already designed and some of them are in design to get more information into the hands of the EOC folks so they can convey that information to you all.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is if you have some loads that you feel are critical and you're curious as to whether they're on the list or not, I'd ask you to reach out to Trish Lassiter and she's our key account rep, and get with her and she can look at the list and see where we're at. I'm certain if you were with Lee Health, most of them are probably on there.
Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, a question. With FPL, how many of the main transformer substations were causing a power outage? Very many? Was it a small amount, or did you have a lot more of them offline than you thought?
Yeah, it was primarily, we lost no transmission. Primarily it was lines that were either down or vegetation issues, or salt intrusion, which is, we all know, been huge, versus whole substations going down. For example, the San Carlos substation on the way out to the beach was partially underwater and a lot had to be replaced, but that was back up in like 3 or 4 days.
Oh.
So we lost no poles or structures due to hardening. And that's the good thing, since it wasn't a rebuild. We in Lee County had everything back in power that could receive power. And as you know, that's a big caveat because many buildings could not. Within 8 days, we have a little over 304,000 customers in Lee County, and 93% lost power. But because it wasn't a rebuild, we were able to bring it back up in that period of time. Whereas with Charlie, just to give you a perspective, get a figure on this. That was prior to our hardening. We had 0.9 million customers out countywide, or excuse me, statewide, and it was a 13-day restoration. So the restoration, because of all the things that we've done, and in addition, I'm kind of diverting a little bit, but still it's helpful to answer your question. We have a tremendous smart grid technology now, and our facilities and equipment can talk to us. So if something's starting to happen, for example, in a substation, if water's starting to rise, there are monitors. So we do shut that substation down. We typically do not shut things down prior to storm just because the storm's coming. There has to be a specific reason at that location to take it down. And with the smart grid, it goes even down to the meters in each person's home. They can talk to us. They can tell us what the issues are. They can tell us, even in blue sky days, if a piece of equipment may start to fail. It'll tell us that, so we can prevent an outage that way. If something does fail, it can tell us what that is. So that all goes into storm restoration, not only at our big substations, but like I said, down to the customer's meter as well. And that helps us tremendously with restoration.
Good, thank you.
Steve, go ahead.
We've noticed over the years that there's been a great improvement in hardening, so it's really positive. But we're still seeing in some of our areas where sub sections of some of our systems have very high frequency of outages. So I'm wondering if are you still using, this may date me, but the SAIDI and SAFI criteria for outages and frequencies? And can that be broken down to subsections of service areas? And I'm thinking like on Corkscrew, where you've hardened a lot. It's been great service, but there are still segments of those communities that go down at a very high frequency.
Yes, we have been evaluating that, and I think I talked about this before you actually came in, Stephen. We have what's called a Storm Secure Underground program. It identifies areas that have higher frequencies of outages than others, determines the reason, and we are putting those areas underground. It's certainly not a quick fix. It's been in place for 3 years and it will continue. Our eventual goal is to have everything undergrounded, but that's going to take a number of years. But yeah, we do use those systems. I don't know. I don't use them personally, so I don't know if they've been updated or if there's another version, but yes, they have certainly been used. We look at where our low reliability pockets are, and whether it's underground or overhead, we identify those and have a list each year that we work to correct whatever the situation is.
Good. Who do we talk to about understanding when we get complaints? Who do we call on those? Can I talk to you about that?
Yeah, you can.
Offline.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I
I'm your
think
source.
What's
go,
that?
go ahead,
I'm your source.
Oh, my.
Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a case in point, something that what we ran into with being on the priority list, and Trish worked very closely with me trying to get the North RO plant back online and off the generator. The problem was, even though we were at the top of the list, the entire feed going to that facility, all the poles were just snapped. So it took a longer period of time for them to go through and replace all of that infrastructure just to get to that high priority asset. And so that was just something that, we experienced, even though we were way up on the list. It took a long time because of the storm was, really bad and tore up a lot of infrastructure. I mean, the poles were just looked like toothpicks all the way.
Yep, a lot of variables go into getting that back together.
Right.
Go ahead, Troy.
Sorry, this question is for Tico. Can you describe the impact that you guys had, here in Lee County? And then to follow up on that, I'd like to just explore a little bit more around using natural gas for generators for specifically healthcare facilities. I know there's some challenges with that because it can be an interrupted source of fuel, or whatever the term is. So the first part,
yeah,
let us know how how you guys did, and then second to follow up on generators.
So full disclosure, this is my second week with Tico Peoples Gas here in Southwest Florida. So I don't want to, provide any false information. I understand that within a few days of Hurricane Ian's impact, we had about 99%, if not all of our customers back online and had their gas being serviced immediately. We also were immediately on the ground checking meters. We had vehicles out checking methane levels to ensure that there were no leaks around not just Lee County, but also counties south of here. So based on the conversations I've had with our operations team here and in Sarasota and in Naples, we were very lucky that our infrastructure wasn't dealt any serious damages. When it comes to generators at healthcare facilities, to your question originally on what facilities are emergency and who are we prioritizing, I know we have our own internal list as well, and we work with the EOC pretty collaboratively, and I'll be the new point of contact with the EOCs here. But I'll have to get back with you specifically on generators for healthcare providers. And if you wouldn't mind if I can take your information so I can get back with you.
Just a quick follow-up, sorry again. Do you guys have like reports of your outcomes from the storm? Are those readily available? Like from LCEC, FPL, or TICO, of just what you experienced, what you kind of did in preparation, but then how you came out of it, and timeliness and just other facts?
I'm pretty certain I can get that to you.
Okay. Same from FPL, I'm sure, and LCEC.
Yeah, we have lessons learned and things we put out there are a matter of public record. I mean, we've spoken to those, so Trish can get you a copy of those.
But I know we have some people online. I want to let Jason here ask a few of the online questions.
All right, so this is a question from Kate Gutterham from the Natural Resources Branch. She asks, what are your weakest links? For example, it might be the power line over Pine Island Sound to Sanibel.
Yeah, I would say the weakest link is the transmission system, because it serves the majority of the customers. So that is a radio, that particular line that she had mentioned, that is a radio line. So if that line goes down, you're going to lose the Barrier Islands. It's served out of Cape Coral. It goes one way. If we lose it at the Spreader Canal at Cape Coral, it will drop Pine Island and Sanibel. One of the things that we have submitted in the FEMA grant process is a looping of that transmission system. And that goes to what Clark was talking about, with the assistance from local and state government, to be able to get those right of ways and those easements to be able to serve that load, to be able to put that line in. So we would have to bring another feed in from another direction, which would impact, the corridors and communities and things of that nature, with transmission structures that would have to come in and then go across the bay. So there'd be multiple permitting that would have to be done in order to accomplish that project. Not to mention the funding to it.
Anything else online? Yep, sure.
This is a question from Diana Giraldo. In general, building energy consumption is a big factor for all buildings and critical facilities which are used for the recovery process. For resiliency and looking into the future, would you agree that implementing energy benchmarking to the government buildings and shelter is an important factor as we seek energy efficiency and support of solar installations to help in the recovery efforts and beyond? Additionally, she also asks, what incentives are the energy providers or other branches of government providing for energy hardening of buildings?
Do you want to take that one? A lot of information there.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to break it down one piece at a time. There's a lot in that question to understand. So specifically to what is government doing to require, if I understood the question correct, with energy efficiencies in buildings? I don't believe we can speak to that. That's probably more at the county level on what the requirements are, because I'm not as familiar with that. So then I guess we'll have to break the first part of it down a little more.
Yeah. Okay. In general, building energy consumption is a big factor for all buildings and critical facilities which are used for the recovery process. For resiliency and looking into the future, would you agree that implementing energy benchmarking to the government buildings and shelter is an important factor as we seek energy efficiency and support of solar installations to help the recovery efforts and beyond?
I can't say that energy resiliency within a building would be much of a factor. And if you feel like I'm wrong about this, please say so. I don't see that is much of a factor as far as a restoration goes with storm restoration. Obviously the electrical panels, anything that goes in there with electrical equipment has to be solid and sound and working appropriately. But as far as the resiliency piece of it, I don't see that that would make a huge difference because what needs to be restored is coming into the building and it would not be the building's responsibility itself.
Yeah, I would agree with Charlotte. I think that that is a factor when we're looking at load studies and capacity and things of that on, you know, planning that we would do for the infrastructure. And those are load calculations that the builders would have to provide to us.
Mhm.
And then, you know, that would go along with whatever, you know, the efficiency requirements are that are, you know, somewhat mandated and come down either.
Which
through
we
the-
get under any circumstance.
Right,
yeah.
which you would get under, but I do think there is a separation between the restoration and resiliency and the load calcs that would go into a building.
Think that to circle back, and Rob mentioned the coordination that goes on after a disaster. We've talked a little bit about the coordination pre-hurricane. You know, I think there's a lot of interconnectivity between utility providers amongst themselves, as well as the broader group of stakeholders. We've seen this across the country as we do exercises in support of large utility companies. And I think that's an area where I'm curious, you know, other than having, you know, one representative in the EOC to troubleshoot issues, you know, is there value in having some additional collaboration there during disasters, maybe amongst utility providers for things like, you know, we've seen other jurisdictions involve them in the first push of debris, you know, having that larger scale coordination above and beyond what currently exists. You know, again, I think some great stuff happens. That EOC relationship is key. Are there any other things that you guys think would make your lives easier? You know, when the bell rings, when the winds start blowing, you know, you mentioned the permitting thing. That's a good example of the post-event support. But anything during the first couple weeks after a storm where maybe there could be some additional collaboration through the different partner agencies throughout the community. Charlotte, go ahead, and then Jeff.
For us, being in the EOC is critical because all the agencies we need and that need us to address those items as they come up, to collaborate along the way are there. Some examples would be like the moving debris. We have special crews that are pre-assigned to each EOC, and they coordinate through our rep. But whatever the county needs, if those special crews are out there with debris folks, moving power lines out of the way so they could move debris, making situations safe. They don't restore power, but anything that's down or dangerous and that is impeding either safety or something the county needs to do, those crews can address that. So that's already in place. We have a whole background, as I know LCEC does, of for FPL employees that have specific assignments to address any type of situation that can come up. We all roll into a storm role, which may or may not be our typical role on a day-to-day basis. So that's a huge piece. And then one thing that's been a huge collaboration, I can't say enough good about the staff at the EOC that we needed and immediately had were additional staging sites. We work prior to storm that certain staging sites are already identified so that we can roll not only our crews, but all the contract crews and all the mutual aid assistance crews that we already have agreements with in place. It's a phone call. They come, they pre-stage as close to as they can to the affected area, and then they roll in right afterwards. Well, with Ian, we needed multiple additional staging sites. And all I had to do was make a call every time. And within 15 minutes, the county had come up with something for us. And I just can't say enough good about that.
Yep, staging is a big one. Yep.
It is.
Go ahead,
And I
Jeff.
would add to it, you know, I mean, I think conversations we're having here today, you know, go a long way in doing that outside of storm season type of collaboration. You know, I mean, it starts, so everybody understands, you know, if you get into it and people aren't talking together prior to the event, they establish their own expectations. And, you know, so by having these conversations, we can really talk about what we can solve and what is going to be a challenge to be able to solve. So building that up front, I think really helps. And that goes a long way in the first few weeks of restoration because, there are expectations that restoration is, a couple day event after you have a Category 4 storm. And it literally is going to take time to be able to go through it. Whether it's the DOT or it's the power companies or water companies or whomever. So everybody understanding what those processes are, I think help up front.
Sure.
And then working together and through the EOCs and others, is
Sure.
the
Yeah,
support that everybody needs.
the more time you spend in the room face to face with somebody, the better things get when it happens. So go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. One of the issues we ran into with some of our lift stations that lost power was trees damaging it and whatnot. And we had to, some of the lines going to the pole were damaged, or the pole, the conduit going up the pole was damaged. And that's like kind of leaves us in a lurch because we have to go through an entire procurement process to try to get that reconnected back to LCEC power. And so that was an issue. Like one of them, we had one that I think the metal conduit was bent. And I mean, you got to get permits, you got to get all this stuff before we could put that station back online. And I just got my last station off of generator or pump, bypass pump like a week ago because they put in like a pedestal box on the ground level. And I mean, I had to hire an outside electrical contractor because I don't have that capability in-house. And so if there was some way that, maybe LCEC could work together with us to get those stations back online without having to, and maybe just bill us for the costs, I think that would be tremendous help for us because like I said, I had one guy complaining that we had a generator running and it was right by one of his windows where he sleeps. So he was not a happy camper because of that, because it was running for a long time. And those generators and pumps are not made to run for weeks or months continuously. And so that was an issue that we ran into. And plus the issue with figuring out, with Haggerty and FEMA, and are we going to get reimbursed, and all that red tape to try to figure out, well, who's going to pay for it, so that's something, if there was a process to streamline when something's damaged that's outside of, like, for instance, a good example is everything past the meter on your water line is the homeowner's responsibility. And it was kind of one of those situations. And then we kind of ran into, well, whose responsibility is it? Is it the cities? Is it LCEC? So being able to be more flexible or resilient to be able to get those kinds of things connected back, no matter what it takes. And all it was, just getting it connected back to the pole or to a pedestal is something we really need to work on, because that's something that, we need to get that sewer system back up and running. Thank you.
Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, great, very specific examples. A related issue here that we've run into in the area, I'm kind of speaking for the housing branch here, is that because of the large scale devastation of housing stock here, that we've had many, many residents who were then seeking other shelters that were then filled with perhaps your crews coming from out of area and all of that. So any experiences that you had about finding places for people to stay and what we could be doing differently in the future to just address that temporary housing need?
What we do is a variety of things. Yes, it was very difficult to find housing in hotels that we would usually utilize. So we bring in a number of sleeping trailers, position them at the staging sites. It actually works well in that that gives the crews more time out in the field because they're not traveling to and from the staging site to a hotel. The staging sites where the trucks are, they eat there, they shower there, everything. So that is one solution that we've had. We also brought in some RVs to put at our service centers. So kind of a similar situation. So we had to get creative as well this time.
Yeah, we had a similar experience. I mean, in the past, our restoration plans was basically based around the model of housing them in hotels. And because of the damage that we had on some of the hotels, we had shortages right from the beginning. We had a lot of competition, and it was some of it was the residents, others was other agencies who were coming in to assist. So we very quickly adapted to the we call it base camp model. And, you know, the base camp could house anywhere between, 500 to 1,000 personnel. And same thing, they would, they'd do the laundry, water, everything, food was right there in the available showers for them. So that's how we did that. And I think by doing that, then it frees up the hotels and the community for other people to be able to relocate into those.
To locate your base camps, is that another issue of coordination with government entities? And are those now established as pre-positioned for a future storm, or can work be done there to set those up in advance in a different way?
Yes, we identify staging sites long before storm, and there are agreements that are drawn up. So we have a number of staging sites in Lee County and along the Southwest Florida coast. What we find though with each particular storm is you may need staging sites that you wouldn't normally have. For example, we needed one on Fort Myers Beach. So the town quickly assisted with us to have a parking area that was a staging site. But for our larger staging sites, they are pre-identified, and then we just roll with whatever we need to do if we need to identify more.
Great. I want to shift us now for kind of the remaining little less than an hour to be looking ahead to the innovations, the solutions, the ideas, as each of the branches will be gathering together what we're calling initiatives and projects that they would recommend that'll be part of the plan here. And so your thoughts as you look into the future around the corner, what are those solutions? What are the innovations that you would want to be incorporated into the overall recovery and resilience plan? So if we can spend our time there now.
At FPL, we've got a very well-oiled machine. So we feel that there are always room for improvement, but we're very happy with the processes for the most part as we went through this restoration, particularly since hardening was so successful. With each storm, something's different. There are supply chain delays, and that's obviously not due to the storm with so many other factors, and we're still experiencing that. The salt intrusion damaged equipment like we have not seen before. That's a manufacturing issue. So we're talking with our manufacturers to see what might be able to be done with that, even though that's not something that occurs every day. It did with this storm, and it could again. So that's a big one. Those are two of the large ones that we're looking at right now. And then just looking at our internal processes to see what worked, what we can do better, and how we can serve our communities better.
Okay. Yeah, or for other, there's a notion of there are these critical parts that without this one part, so do those get kind of pre-ordered, stockpiled? Is there a
Yes, that's a
inventory?
very good question. We do pre-order, and so when hurricane season rolls around, we're pre-ordering, particularly if there are some that may be in that supply chain delay category. And then when we know a storm is coming in that direction, wherever those units are, we start shipping them close to where we're going to need them, so we don't have to delay further on waiting on deliveries.
And I think very similar. We have storm kits that we put together and we put those aside. We don't use those for regular work. And we stock up on those things coming in the storm season. The the innovative things that we talked about, I think, are the raising of the substations and the looping of the transmission system. We submitted some of those projects to FEMA. As Charlotte had mentioned, one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about underground and as if that, that's the solution. And I will tell you that underground performs very well in areas that are outside of flood zones. Inside of a flood zone, we're going to have probably about 100% replacement in certain areas, Sanibel being one of them, Marco Island, Pine Island, and to the tune of probably around $100 million. So, and that is just because of the intrusion of the salt water. It's not just the cable, it's also the components, it's the connection points, the elbows, the secondary connections on the transformers are failing at a rate that you can't imagine. The corrosion sets up in them and they just deteriorate in a matter of months. So there's a lot of work activities that are going to have to go in to updating or replacing all that equipment. And it's going to be a long-term process that we have to go through.
I completely agree. It weakens the system, and some of those weaknesses do not show their face right away. So it's something that's ongoing. I mean, you hear of fires in electrical systems and vaults in condos, et cetera. Some of them were a week or 2 or 3 after the storm. Some were a little bit later than that. So it's an ongoing process.
Just back to LCEC real quick. What was that estimate for the repairs? Or
Just on the underground, it's going to be somewhere between 100 and 120 million. 120 million.
for the barrier islands?
That's a combination of Sanibel, Marco, Pine Island, and probably along the river.
Okay.
There was salt intrusion that went all the way up to Caloosahatchee to the locks. So anything that was flooded along those zones, especially the electrical components, you're going to see those issues. They're going to arise no matter where that flood water hit along the river.
I do need to give a compliment that I'm right on the Caloosahatchee River. We had 8 feet of water around us, and magically the power came on within 3 hours after it was off. I have no clue how that could ever have happened because nobody could have gotten to us, but it came back on.
I didn't get any messages to come over, Terry. What happened? Yeah.
Terry had air conditioning.
Yeah. One quick follow-up just on resiliency as we're talking about that. We've talked a lot about just underground, above ground, natural gas. I know you're probably all involved in solar in some form or fashion. How did that perform, during the storm or after the storm at all?
FPL's focus is on large solar fields, 74.5 megawatts. We have, I think it's close to 35 throughout our state now. They performed well. They are built to hurricane strength standard. Very few panels were damaged. So we were very fortunate and very glad to see how well they performed. It really wasn't an issue for us.
And FP&L is our power provider. So by default, we share in what their generation load is as well.
If I may follow up on that comment and question, the model that plays out at Babcock Ranch is a little bit different than simply the solar panels doing what they're supposed to do within those circumstances, and very few were damaged. What is there a potential solution within the Babcock model where there could be some banking of energy and a redistribution after? Is that on the horizon, or does it exist?
With the banking of energy, could you describe that a little bit more for me?
The solar captures
Right.
the energy.
Right.
You all transition that to the energy.
Mhm.
And as I understand it, there's a potential for banking the energy to be
Oh, banking.
utilized.
I'm sorry. I thought you said baking.
Oh. No, ma'am.
Need to understand what that is. Yes, finally, it is cost effective. So we are installing battery storage at some of our solar facilities. Babcock has some. Manatee County has a large number of battery storage facilities. So that is going to be very much implemented in the near future at our different solar arrays. And it'll really change the course of how power is presented in the future. FPL's position is that we want to eventually be totally either solar or something that does not use natural gas or fuels that we're dependent on how much we can get, how much the cost is, because that is passed on to the customer, whether it go. Fortunately, our bills are just going down because it's come down a little bit, but it'll go up sometimes too. So our long-term vision is to be all solar or natural sources or not natural sources, but no fuel or no gas. And you'll see more and more of that.
Go ahead.
So Charlie, that was a good point. So the banking, not baking, the banking of power has become more affordable. Is that a possible solution for all the lift stations, all these places we're talking about that need generators and, for every utility? I mean, do you see that? Do you think that's going to be an option instead of, having hundreds or even thousands of generators that you have to upkeep, but just having battery on site that'll help that for a few days?
I'm not the expert on small scale solar. I believe that is already available in certain forms. FPL focuses on the large scale, like I said, 74.5 megawatts. We certainly encourage folks if they want to do the smaller scale on their buildings, their lift stations, their homes, whatever, and they can actually tap into our system to, if they generate more than they actually use, that it can be fed back and they're paid a wholesale rate for it. But I don't know, somebody else might have more information on the small scale than I do.
I can talk to it. We've explored it over the years, seeing if there's some technology out there where they wrap poles in solar panels and the batteries are stored inside. It's really expensive and there's not a whole lot of testing or experience that says how well it would hold up to a storm event. I can tell you that the systems that we've looked at, we haven't felt very confident that they would still be there after a major hurricane came through. And so that's been one reason why we haven't really kind of gone down that path as a trial balloon at an intersection. We've reached out to FGCU. Is there a way to potentially power the traffic signal on campus from their grid system there that they have with all the solar panels? There's just not a whole lot of excitement in the industry, I would say right now, to try to go solar for the traffic signal network, the signal system. So, the most that we dabble in solar is with some of our standalone signs, the speed limit flashing signs or school flashers. And a lot of those are full of replacements, I'll tell you, after Hurricane Ian.
Steve and then Fred. Yep.
On the list.
And I just to speak to that for a second, I wish it was as simple as making, for instance, our traffic signal cabinets waterproof. That'd be great. Problem is that these things are hot boxes. They got to have ventilation. We've got to get airflow in there, or else they're going to overheat and the traffic signal is not going to work. Yeah. So I don't know how the lift stations work per se, but I can tell you it's not as easy as just making a system waterproof. We'd have to elevate the cabinets, and these cabinets are ginormous. So now you're putting them on a pole and we got to go 12 to 16 feet in the air for it to physically, in some locations for it to be out of the flood zone, maintenance becomes an issue. It's almost as cheaper for us to go replace the signal cabinet after the storm than it is for us to elevate these things and have to maintain it for a long period of time up 16 feet up in the air.
Yep. Good comments. Steve, one more follow-up, Fred? Yep.
That's a good thing. Makes people feel better. People feel better.
I really appreciate that comment. Thank you. Yeah, we worked really hard to enhance that. And with Irma, one of the challenges that faced us was that it hit our entire service territory, which is not typical. So we faced some extra challenges, and communication was one thing we absolutely agree with you that it needed to be better. So I'm glad you experienced that with the end.
Very good. Steve, go ahead.
Ditto, by the way, just really very positive. In the other branches, and I'm following up on Ryan's comment here a little bit about post disaster events. The problem that we all had was finding temporary shelters, finding fuel, powering lift stations, powering intersections and all that. And we all came to the table after Irma and Ian and said, we need to get generators at all of these various facilities. And I can just imagine the bill going in for generators for all of us is going to be astronomical. One of the problems that we found is that none of the sites that could fit our needs were set up to handle the quick fix to the generators. So we had churches and schools that could have served as temporary facilities. We couldn't, it would have taken the work of an electrician several hours to make the connection. The same thing for gas. We had a lot of gas underground, but we couldn't pump it. We had cell phone towers that were not powered, and we couldn't get to. We had tons of intersections, we couldn't get power to them. So instead of everyone running out to get generators, I wonder if there's a way, a program that we could standardize a panel with the help of FPNL so that we could roll up generators and have a central supply of generators, or every community has a bunch that we could plug and play at various spots around. Because we had generators in several of our communities for pump stations, and this is not castigating anybody, but we had raw sewage 1 inch below the floor grade of whole neighborhoods that we barely got to them because they were never set up for electrical connection on the pump stations from generators. So this is a common problem. We were talking about shelters and at one of the other branch meetings, gas stations and all this, but there seems to be a common focus of not being able to get the temporary power generation to enough places after an event to be effective. And that's not necessarily a utility problem, but it seems to be a holistic problem that we could all.
Sure.
direct.
No, seems like a common theme. That's
Yeah.
definitely worth noting. Jeff, did you have something on that, or Rob?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we don't have that same experience. I would say 90% of our traffic signals have battery backups that have the generator plugs already in there. The issue that we have is one of our signal techs is gonna kill me if I say this wrong, but we need dirty power, not clean power. I think the generators that we get from FDOT, a lot of times they filter the power to a point, and if it goes below a certain level in the signal system, it'll stop working. And so we need the thing to be consistently producing the same amount of power. And it just, these generators fluctuate up and down. Our biggest issue with generators is just being the constant refueling that has to happen. And FDOT does their thing. They take over all of their traffic signals after a hurricane. We take over all the counties and the cities. And FDOT, God love them, they don't have the crews there to actually keep these things fueled. So we end up having to go fuel their generators on top of our generators. And we're running crews constantly, just running gas out to these generators. So, I mean, that's why for us, the coordination effort with the power companies on where we're likely to see power within the next 24 to 48 hours would be really beneficial. And we go focus on getting generators in the other locations and let FP&L and LCEC do their job and get the power back at these other intersections. So that's kind of for us, you know, how we would like to see things kind of happen.
Yeah, there's probably a technical conversation there, but yeah, the takeaway is even if you have one or two pieces of the puzzle, you may not have the third and fourth piece that you need to find the full solution. So yeah, good takeaway. Jeff.
One of the issues we ran into we got a ton of generators coming in from all over, and from Flaw-Warren and some of the members of Flaw-Warren. The issue was, and we have a lot of the quick connects to the lift stations. The problem was the wires or no wires sent with the generators. So we had a problem getting them actually connected to the control panels. And in some cases, we just had to directly wire them in and bypass the quick connects because we didn't have the correct plugs.
Ciola, I ordered a forklift, but didn't order a forklift operator, right? I mean,
Right. So
second puzzle piece. Yeah.
The generators are like GFI generators, and the signal, I'm sure probably your infrastructure is the same way. It needs to be non-GFI. And we put specific requirements in when we requested the generators, and we get delivered whatever they can get us, you know? And so it comes in, and then our guys are having to make modifications to the generator that FDOT and, you know, the emergency management people aren't too happy about when they get the generator returned to them after we have power restored everywhere.
yeah, we had to cut a lot of wires.
A little bit of improvising. Yep.
Along these lines of backup generation in some way, it comes to redundant feeds. A suggestion I would have to entities that have funding available to you, not going to work for the private sector, but maybe some public, is to request money to get redundant feeds in. When a member comes to us and says, hey, you know, we want to put in a facility, we typically will ask, you know, do you want a redundant feed? And typically the response is, well, how much is that going to cost? And nah, we'll opt not to have that. If you've got some funding sources available at this point, put a request in it, and it's not going to work in all locations. We may not have, there may not be a second circuit nearby to feed that particular facility. But if there is, that's one way of getting a backup feed in. Because y'all know, you know, this street's lit up, but this street's not lit up. Well, it's a good chance it's on a different circuit. So same thing can work with some of these facilities. But again, hospitals, fire stations, police stations, some of the shelters. Again, I would just encourage you to do that. We actually have put it in. It's not a FEMA request yet. It's kind of working its way through our consultants about would it even qualify for FEMA money for us to fund some of these redundant feeds. But if it's coming from various entities, it might carry a bit more weight and might happen. Again, it's probably not going to help for a lift station necessarily. I would also, though, on the lift stations, you know, a lot of those lift stations, and I'll say over Cape, they're fed overhead. And sometimes there's a problem with that overhead service. You know, whether it's trucks going by or debris in the line that brings that overhead service down. You might put in a request via FEMA or wherever the funding are available to convert some of those feeds to underground feeds. And you've got some on the median, for example, and it'd be an underground feed from a overhead pole on the side of the road, but we would come underground and feed that location. Again, it's not going to help during flooding situations, but it might give a little bit more reliability to that particular service. I would encourage you to tap that. By the way, we also have a request into our consultant, whether or not that would qualify from us to do that process too.
Yeah. Building off the redundancy, want to come back to one of the issues that sounded like an area of solutions that are needed. And that's the new acronym that I learned today, the PUE, the Public Utility Easements. And what the process is there, and if it's a matter of coordinating with government regulators and getting those established. The public hearing processes typically that have to go through and all that, but your thoughts of, are there some priority PUEs that have been mapped out, and is there a effort to coordinate with government entities for the approvals that you need and fast tracking those?
I would say at this point, because of the FEMA process, we do not have them mapped out yet. With the FEMA process, it's some of the funding requirements are that you don't have plans in place. You don't have projects budgeted. You're not in some stage of development with respect to a project. So the ones that we discussed, Alan identified, or maybe I mentioned, those are still in the infant stages, seeing if we can get funding at that one. If we're told we can get funding or move ahead, then we will move the process of doing the engineering design, which would then identify where we would need easements.
Those easements aren't free. That's just the biggest thing. I mean, we have to get easements on all of our road projects, and time, money, it's the biggest headache with regards to road building and relocating of utilities. 100%, these easements are possibly not really the answer. It would be my.
But so what I heard for the Barrier Island, there's a single point of failure, as I understood the grid, that if the Pine Island Sound line goes down, it's game over. So that feels like it is a high priority to restore a large community, large area. So yeah, what would it take to get from nothing to actually having that type of redundancy in there? And is that even a priority? Does anybody, should that be on the list of initiatives that is prioritized?
Right.
So how has the outlook changed from pre-storm to post-storm on some of these CapEx projects that were funded or in there for funding to now, and the prioritization of that? But obviously the common theme here is hardening assets, right? Distribution and transmission. But how has that outlook changed from prior to the storm to now?
Yeah, I think with regards to some of the big idea projects, the looping of Sanibel, Pine Island, that would something that it's not like we would say, oh, we never thought about doing that. It's just, it was so far out because of the effort that it would take and the dollars and everything associated. You got so many other projects that are more near term that you have to work on with the replacement of those. So it does give the opportunity to be able to look at some of these areas that, were built
60 years ago, and they were built radial feeds, and be able to say, now we have an opportunity to be able to put a loop in there. And it's not just in Lee County, it's also down in Collier County and other areas in our service territory. And these are big projects, and they're, big undertakings. So it pulls those projects in to becoming more of a reality from a funding perspective. And if you can get the funding, then like Clark said, then you gotta, and gentleman from DOT, you gotta go through all the challenges that you have to go through to get the easements and the right of ways and everything, permits, right? Because you're gonna have environmental permits and all kinds of things you're gonna have to deal with.
Yeah, and maybe to build on it too, is right now, I don't think we've gotten anything authorized from FEMA on the HMGP yet. And quite frankly, we've got 3 projects from Irma that we've yet to get authorization to proceed on. It's a long project.
Go ahead.
So with, the focus on some of these barrier island feeders, you have a number of them being subaqueous. Is there a thought process of taking that, the one going from Pine Island to Sanibel and building subaqueous redundancy, or is that mostly an overhead concept?
Yeah, excuse me, most of that would be on an overhead concept of building that design. The thing that you get into is you're going through some environmentally sensitive areas. So there are certain things that you can do and other things you can't do. And, you would have to plow all that in, and then, there's exponentially the cost for underground transmission is more than what overhead is. And there's a lot of other, associated things to go into that. There are areas that people have put them underground. We do have a section in South Cape that has an underground transmission. But historically and typically we do overhead.
Yeah, and we're confident in our overhead design, the reliability of our overhead design on the transmission. For example, I mean, we didn't map it out, but there's a good chance that a portion of the eye followed our transmission line from Sanibel to Pine Island to Cape Coral. Once again, it weathered that quite well. And now this afternoon, a Pelican will go face to face and it'll come down, but so we're confident with the design that we have. And we also have to look at the cost of the projects too. As you mentioned, as part of the FEMA process, it's the cost effectiveness of these projects, and redundancy doesn't necessarily score real high on the project selection.
That's a great questions there. I think, I know Terry, keep me accountable here on time. I know we're getting close, about 5 more minutes, and maybe just to wrap up a couple comments. I think going back to even the first question and Terry's, first question there, in a perfect world, if all the resources were available to you all, kind of I'm curious, looking 5 years ahead, are there, we've mentioned a few of these big ticket, big idea projects, looking towards the future, are there any other, ideas that have been in waiting for a while, or things that people at the leadership level have said, hey, one day we'd love to do this? I'm just curious, maybe some final comments on just recapping those big picture ideas, as we may have some resources available.
Sure, I'll go first. How about
Sure,
that?
go ahead, Rob.
Not really related to power, but it's related to a lot of the discussions that we've been having throughout these Resilient Lee meetings. The county has a project that would connect our advanced traffic management system with our public safety dispatch system that is used for all the ambulances and fire truck dispatch, along with our transit bus system. That would basically give us the ability to expand our preemption footprint countywide. It would use the technology that we already have in place in all 3 of those systems and build a communication block that would then give our traffic management system more information as to where calls are, where ambulances and fire trucks are going, where buses that are behind schedule, so that we could try to maintain headways. The system is like $4 to $5 million. We'd have to upgrade a lot of our signal controllers. This is a project that right now we have preemption in 2 of our fire districts, South Trail and Iona McGregor. And when one of those ambulances goes through one of our intersections, it screws everything up. So this system would allow our controller to take advantage of the computer that's in there and actually make timing adjustments in advance of the ambulance and fire truck showing up so that it doesn't kick it out of coordination. It would basically eliminate these issues where we lose coordination of our mainline arterial roadways. So it's something that when we first started looking at it 5 or 6 years ago was extremely expensive. Now it's getting rolled out more and more across the country. The cost is going down, so we've got it down under the $5 million range. And so we've put it in as a project. I know public safety is putting it in as a project, but that's something that can really have widespread impacts on making our system day to day operate more efficiently and more resiliently.
Any other closing comments? I think we're getting close to time, but lots of good ideas. Yeah, this side of the room, go ahead.
So just first off, a big thank you to each one of you for all the work you have done pre-storm, post-storm, and continue to do. So we definitely appreciate that. Just real quick, go down the line, 1 to 10. How ready is your organization for the next storm?
10.
Okay, Tico?
We're ready. So we're a 10, but our system may not be ready.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
We're always ready for anything that nature throws at us, but we're always looking to improve.
I appreciate your honesty. There's a lot of residential still putting on roofs, still doing a lot of things. A lot of us probably would be much lower than a 10. So, but that's good to know. Thank you.
All right.
If I
Oh,
may.
yes, Stephanie, go ahead.
Real quick before my original question, relating to the $4 to $5 million project for the traffic management, do you all have line of sight to how that program has managed catastrophic events in other areas? Does it stand up to the weather?
Yeah, so it's all built through communications. So we have fiber that connects to 98% of our traffic signals already today. And if we power, we have communications in most cases. There's only a couple instances where besides losing a power, we didn't lose communication. And we just lost communication because we didn't have power to our nodes. So getting generators on the nodes got the communications back up. So it would be functional for the most part. The issue would be, if we lose power.
Thank you. There was a lot of discussion about funding streams, grants. I know that there are some other areas related to critical infrastructure that tee up pre-arranged contracts. Is there any, and then I know there's a lot of guardrails between public and private. Is there any effort or discussion relating to a collaborative where you all plus water utilities, municipalities, where there's a streamlined effort of funding streams to think creatively, or developer assets as new construction begins to parlay easements? Or I think the Live Local Act may also play a significant role in what might be possible to think more outside of the box. I know that was kind of a lot I just threw at you, but I appreciate subject matter expertise, learning so much from you. And those were my high level questions.
Just as a comment on that, as far as developers, that's probably the best group of folks that we deal with respect to infrastructure. On PUEs or easements, they have the ability to incorporate those into their development plans. So that's one of the reasons you see underground. It's a lot easier to underground when you do it up front than it is to come back and do overhead to underground conversions. And so we have good relationships with the private sector, especially in that area.
And then just related to the project based. So if you're applying for FEMA grants to raise your substations, are there similar buckets for the residential meters that need to be raised, but they're not? Is there a more collective approach to an efficient response and resiliency?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, and I don't want to give you a big head, Charlotte, but we've been working with Charlotte Miller for a long time in Estero, well, since 2015. And she's been very responsive to our needs. Unfortunately, she got ambushed this time at the Hyatt, where she had a bunch of folks set up to come in to help the day before the storm, and they had the surge there. But the next day they were set up, like she said, the compound over to Coconut Point Mall with the folks with trailers where they could shower. They even had their fueling depot set up over there. So, and I just wanted to comment on some of you fellows were talking about the underground transformers that have been damaged that have to be replaced. You folks have come out the last 30 days and all the high rises on Estero Bay, we've had all those transformers replaced. And there's really a good buzz in the community about how proactive you folks are, not waiting for those things to fail.
Thank you.
Now that we have a little time to breathe and put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So thank you
Power
for all your
delivery
work.
team would love to hear that. So thank you. I will share.
All right. No, great conversations. I always get excited to see what our team's going to do to put these ideas on paper and then take this conversation further than we did today. So thanks, everyone. Terry, I'll pass to you.
Great. Okay. We do have time for public comment. If there's anybody here who has a comment that they want to make, just raise your hand. Let me know. No. Okay. All right. But this played out exactly as we had hoped it would. It was about the subject matter experts. It was about learning, becoming informed, addressing questions that our branches have during the course of their research and deliberations. So I hope that everybody feels well supported, respected, listened to, and know that the tremendous amount of information you shared will be incorporated into our planning process going forward. Back to you, Lee.
Yeah, I don't have anything else other than, yeah, it's an exciting topic. It's an area where I think there's lots of potential to grow and move forward on. And as we've talked about, every time a group like this with this much knowledge on a specific topic gets in the room, good things happen. So hopefully this isn't the last time we all get together and we can continue this discussion.
Yeah. If there's any ideas that come to you as you're driving away or in the middle of the night or follow-up information, you want to share some of these reports that are requested, info@resiliently.org is kind of manned 24/7. This is a great place to direct information for the support team here, Haggerty Consulting and Collaboratory, to be able to respond to anything that you have. And Robbie, did you want me to touch on anything else here? No. Okay. Very good. Oh, yeah. Okay, so yes, just use this QR code if there are initiatives, projects that came to mind for you to be incorporated into the work of the branches. The support team will be doing a quick turnaround to incorporate these ideas into the presentation for Friday's Recovery Task Force. So if there are things that you definitely want us to be aware of, I know it's a quick turnaround, but we appreciate your guidance as branch members and leads.
All right. Thanks, everyone. If there's nothing else, you'll have a great afternoon. Thank you.